There's our recording in progress voice. Today's conversation is about what is called the 5 supports that lead to awakening. And the question in my write-up about this talk, I don't know if anybody saw it, if you got the newsletter, but it's how do we bring awakening into the midst of our modern lives? And this afternoon I want to explore 5 timeless teachings from the Buddha about friendship on the path, about living with integrity, about listening to the Dharma, and cultivating effort, which I spoke quite a bit about last week as well, under different context, and listening to the Dharma, seeing impermanence clearly. So those are the 5: friendship, living with integrity, listening to the Dhamma, cultivating effort, seeing impermanence clearly. I'll use stories and my heart and refer to suttas and hoping to show how awakening is supported moment by moment in our relationships, practice and daily choices offering encouragement for everyone. The Buddha often pointed out that the path to awakening is both simple and profound, and challenging. And so he also indicated that we didn't need elaborate rituals or secret teachings or in an exotic environment to find liberation. What we need are conditions supportive and steady and conducive to insight that allow the heart and the mind to awaken to reality as it truly is. In the Theravāda tradition, the Buddha identified these essential conditions that directly nourish awakening. Admirable friends, you might have heard the word kalyanamitta, that's the Pali word. Many times sitting groups call themselves kalyanamitta because they're a gathering of friends. There's virtue, or it's also considered harmonious living. That is sila in Pali. There's hearing the Dharma. Wait a minute, I have to change something here. There we go. There's hearing the Dharma, sadhamma savana, and there's effort in abandoning unskillful qualities. This is viriya, and awareness of impermanence, anicca nupassana. So each of these is like a doorway, and together they form a sturdy house for awakening. They're not abstract ideals, they're lived experiences that we cultivate in daily life. So I'd like to reflect on each of these 5 supports, drawing from the Pali Canon and from modern teachers, and offer a short guided meditation and some questions for your own reflecting. So the first one of these supports is admirable friends, kalyanamitta. The Buddha once told his attendant Ananda that admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie is actually the whole of the holy life. Ananda had suggested that it was half of the holy life, but the Buddha corrected him. No, it's the whole thing. Why? Because our companions shape our values, our habits, even our vision of what is possible. If we're surrounded by people who celebrate greed and anger and delusion, we tend to lean that way. But if we're surrounded by admirable friends, those who embody kindness and integrity, wisdom, we're inspired to walk in that direction ourselves. I remember in my early years of practice being uncertain whether meditation was really working for me. I felt scattered and restless and Honestly, sometimes more neurotic than before I started. But then I joined a local meditation group where a couple of long-term practitioners sat quietly every week. They weren't flashy or charismatic. They didn't try to impress anyone. They simply radiated steadiness. Being around them was like being near a campfire. You warmed up just by sitting close. That was my first taste of how admirable friends can shape our practice. They gave me hope. If they can embody peace, then maybe I can too. And there's a well-known sutta, the Upada Sutta. In the Upada Sutta, the Buddha makes a striking correction, the one that I was mentioning to Ananda, his assumption about the role of admirable friends. Ananda says, "This is half of the holy life, Lord, having admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues." The Buddha responds firmly, "No, not so, Ananda. It's the whole of the holy life." This exchange reveals the Buddha's deep conviction that awakening does not unfold in isolation. Without admirable friends, we lack the reminders, encouragement, and living examples that sustain practice. With them, every step of the path becomes possible. The sutta goes further. The Buddha explains that having admirable friends leads directly to cultivating the noble Eightfold Path. A true friend will encourage right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, the Eightfold Path. Friendship then is not just emotional support, it's the very framework of the path manifest in relationship. And in practical terms, this means that choosing companions on the path is a profound act of spiritual discernment. It also means that becoming a friend of integrity is a form of offering the Dharma itself. I often reflect on this sutta when I'm with fellow practitioners. Each moment of honesty and patience or kindness that we share together isn't just friendship, it's the spiritual life itself in action. Bhikkhu Bodhi, a well-known monk and translator of the Buddha's suttas, has said that admirable friends create the climate in which the seeds of the Dharma can flourish. They're not necessarily saints. They might just be people who gently nudge us toward better parts of ourselves. Sometimes they're Dharma teachers, but often they're fellow travelers. The friend who reminds you to breathe when you're caught in anger. Or the Sangha member who still shows up to a sit after a hard week. Modern psychology backs this up. Studies show that moods and habits are contagious. If your friends exercise regularly, you're more likely to exercise. If your friends smoke, you're more likely to smoke. In the Dharma, it works the same way. When our friends value generosity, compassion, and meditation, we are naturally pulled in that direction. The Buddha himself is a perfect example of this. After his awakening, after being asked by the Devas to teach, one of his first thoughts was, who can I share this with? He sought out his 5 former companions because he knew that awakening blossoms most fully in community, in the field of Kalyanamitta. Admirable friendship is not only about finding others. It's about being that kind of friend. Awakening is contagious. When we show patience, honesty, or forgiveness, others breathe a little easier. We pass the torch along. Admirable friends are not always solemn monks. Sometimes they're the friend who reminds you to eat before you get hungry, or the one who notices when you're being hard on yourself and cracks a joke to lighten the mood. Once I had a friend who, whenever I got stuck in self-doubt, would say, well, at least you're not as confused as my dog. And I used to not think my dog was very confused because he usually does what I say, but Lately I've been throwing his toys and he gets completely confused trying to figure out which one's which. So somehow that always broke the spell and it made me chuckle. There's another powerful sutta, Putta Sutta. And it's a reminder of the role of admirable friendship. Here the Buddha declares that having admirable friends is not only supportive, but is in fact the chief external condition for attaining the first stage of awakening, which is called stream entry. He says, when a noble disciple has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. In other words, the very entry into the current of awakening is inseparable from the influence of wise companions. And what's striking in this discourse is that Sariputta himself, one of the Buddha's wisest and most realized disciples, attributes his own awakening to the guidance and the encouragement of the Buddha as his admirable friend. Even someone of such extraordinary capacity is still relied on the relational condition of friendship. Awakening doesn't bypass human connection, it flourishes with it. And I find it deeply reassuring, even if Sariputta, with his towering wisdom, acknowledged the necessity of admirable friends, then it's no weakness for us to rely on one another. And on the contrary, it is the design of the path itself. When we come together to practice, when we remind each other of the Dharma, in times of confusion or despair, we're participating in this ancient stream of awakening. The second one is morality and virtue, sila. The Buddha consistently placed morality at the foundation of the path. Without it, meditation collapses into distraction and guilt, and wisdom has no foothold. Sila is not about puritanic rules. It's about living in such a way that the heart is light, unburdened, and trustworthy. The 5 precepts fall under sila: refraining from killing, taking what isn't given, refraining from sexual misconduct, or from false speech, or from taking substances that cloud the mind. So for monastic, the rules are a lot more detailed, but the spirit is the same. Protect life, cultivate honesty, guard the senses, and live simply. It's a way of harmoniously living with ourselves and with others. Years ago, a close friend of mine returned a wallet. He found it on the street, and inside was a large amount of cash, enough to cover several months' rent. He didn't even consider keeping it. And when the owner gratefully retrieved it, he looked almost shocked that the money was still in there. My friend shrugged and said, "It wasn't mine." That moment taught me more about sila than any lecture. The beauty of virtue is that it frees us from inner debate. The mind doesn't need to wrestle with temptation when the heart is already clear about what matters. Another dimension of sila is how it benefits others. When people know we are trustworthy, they relax around you. Your presence becomes a refuge. That's no small gift. In a world full of suspicion, to be someone others can rely on is a precious offering. Here's another sutta in the Digha Nikaya. It's sutta number 16. And the Buddha describes as the basis, he describes virtue as the basis, the foundation, the root of wholesome states. He often emphasizes that sila leads to non-regret, which leads to joy, which leads to concentration. And that leads to wisdom. It's a chain reaction. Living ethically naturally creates the conditions for meditation and insight. And he also talks about hearing the Dharma in a section within that DN 16. It's called the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. This was one of the most important discourses in the canon, the Buddha's last teachings before his passing into the deathless. The Parinibbana Sutta, which recounts the Buddha's final days, emphasizes the role of both virtue and dharma as guiding lights for practitioners. As his passing approached, the Buddha urged the monks not to rely on him personally, but to rely on the Dharma and on their own integrity of practice. He said, "Be islands unto yourself. Be your own refuge, with no other refuge. Take the Dhamma as your island, the Dhamma as your refuge, with no other refuge." These words place enormous emphasis on sila, on morality, and on hearing, remembering, and living the Dharma. Even in the absence of the Buddha's physical presence, the way forward is clear. Let the Dharma and the discipline of virtue be your compass. For me, this is both sobering and empowering. Sobering because it reminds us that no teacher, no matter how extraordinary, can walk the path for us. Empowering because it confirms that the tools we need are already available. When we embody integrity in our lives and keep the Dharma alive in our hearts and communities, we are continuing the Buddha's legacy directly. The sutta also underscores that the Dharma is not fragile. It does not vanish when a teacher dies. It lives on in speech, in practice, and in ethical choice. Mira, take this with you.
Oh, no, thank you.
No?
No.
It's notes from today and the questions. All right. Just as a candle can light another without losing its flame, so too the Dharma continues to be transmitted through the hearing, remembering, and practicing of it. In times when we may feel spiritually adrift, these instructions are a reminder that we are never without guidance. The Dharma itself is our constant friend. Of course, living morally isn't always glamorous. I sometimes joke that my greatest act of virtue is not honking and yelling at reckless drivers, which I tend to fall into quite a bit. But really, even small acts of restraint are meaningful. Every time we choose patience over irritation, generosity over selfishness, or truth over exaggeration, we strengthen the roots of awakening. In another sutta, the Buddha emphasizes that morality is not grim. It's joyful restraint, the freedom that comes from not being entangled. When we refrain from harmful speech, we don't have to remember our lies. When we refrain from stealing, we don't live in fear of being caught. I sometimes describe this sila as a kind of spiritual chiropractic. It aligns us. When our actions, speech, and intentions are in harmony, we walk straighter and breathe easier. The third support is hearing the Dharma. This third support is listening to the Dharma. The Buddha emphasized again and again that hearing the true teaching is indispensable. Without exposure to the Dharma, how would we know where the path even begins? In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha says that hearing the Dharma is it's one of the 4 factors of stream entry, that jhana state. It plants the seeds of right view, orienting the mind toward liberation. And stream entry is the foundational step on the path to full liberation, paving the way for further spiritual progress. In Theravāda Buddhism, stream entry is the first of 4 stages of enlightenment that marks a permanent and irreversible shift in consciousness. And a stream enterer has gained firm conviction in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and has shed the first 3 of the 10 fetters or hindrances, that of self-view, that of doubt about the path, and attachment to rites and rituals. The teachings say that this attainment guarantees full awakening within a maximum of 7 more lifetimes and eliminates the possibility of rebirth in lower realms. That gives us quite a bit to think about. They possess unshakable confidence and wisdom regarding the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha. I'll never forget the first Dharma talk I attended on retreat. The teacher spoke simply about the 4 Noble Truths, but I felt like I was hearing something I'd known all along, yet I'd forgotten. Tears welled up, not of sadness, but of recognition. It was like being reminded of my own name. That's the power of hearing the Dharma. It awakens memory in the heart. A sense of truth has always been here waiting. Sharon Salzberg of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, whom I've often quoted, has written probably a dozen books, mainly about the Brahmaviharas and faith and loving kindness, saying that hearing the Dharma is like planting seeds in the soil of the mind. We may not see immediate results, but the teachings work underground, quietly reshaping how we see the world. One day, in a moment of crisis, we suddenly remember, this is impermanent. This too will pass. And that memory shifts everything. Hearing the Dharma also extends beyond formal talks. Sometimes we hear it in silence, sitting by a river, listening to wind in the trees, watching the rise and fall of our breath. Nature too preaches impermanence, interconnectedness, and letting go. The point is to stay receptive. Hearing the Dharma doesn't always happen in formal settings. Sometimes it's in a line of a poem, or a child's innocent question, or the sight of a dying flower that suddenly whispers, nothing lasts, let go. One evening I heard a child ask her mother in the grocery store, why do we get mad if we're just going to forget it later? That was a Dharma teaching in miniature. Right there in the grocery store, I was hearing the Dharma. Next we have effort, viriya. Effort's the engine of the path. The Buddha was clear. Liberation doesn't come through wishful thinking. We must put in effort, not straining or forcing, but diligent balance. Balanced energy directed toward the wholesome. Okay, so see if you can follow me on this. This is sometimes a little hard to follow, but there's only 4 things to notice about right effort. The Buddha outlines these 4 ideas of right effort. One is to prevent unarisen, unwholesome states. The second is abandoning arisen, unwholesome states. Then we have cultivating unarisen, wholesome states, and maintaining and increasing arisen, wholesome states. So we have preventing unarisen, unwholesome, abandoning arisen, unwholesome, cultivating unarisen, wholesome, and maintaining and increasing arisen, wholesome states. On a 10-day retreat, I hit a wall about day 6. The mind was restless, the body ached, and all I wanted was to escape. I fantasized about cheeseburgers and Netflix and even cleaning my house. Anything but sitting still. What got me through wasn't inspiration. It was effort. I told myself, just stay for one more sit. And then another, and another. And slowly the resistance softened. And what opened up afterward was a depth of stillness I'd never known. Effort doesn't mean we never wobble. It means we keep showing up one step, one breath at a time. Gil Fronsdale of Insight Meditation Center in Northern California is one of my favorite teachers. And he's written the book Issue at Hand, a classic to reread dozens of times. He, among other teachers, reminds us that effort in Buddhism is about balance. Not too tight, not too loose. Too much force leads to burnout. Too little leads to stagnation. The Buddha compared it to tuning a lute string. If it's too slack, it won't play. If it's too tight, it will snap. Right effort hums. I spoke a lot about effort last week, and this is just a reminder that effort, which is also seen as energy, it plays a great role in the Buddhist teachings. It appears many places. And effort's the engine of the path. The Buddha was clear that liberation doesn't come through wishful thinking. We must put in effort. Not straining, not forcing, but diligent, balanced effort directed toward the wholesome. One day on a retreat, I hit a wall. Oh, I told you about that already. I repeated it in my notes. Here's another, the Iddhipada Sutta. I spoke about this last week in more detail. The Buddha outlines the 4 bases of spiritual power. Concentration based on desire, energy, mind, and investigation. These are bases of spiritual power. It's a wholesome desire to practice. Energy, mind, and investigation. Each is sustained by effort and intention, and each serves as a channel through which transformative energy flows. This teaching reminds us that effort is not one-dimensional. It can be fueled in different ways, sometimes by aspiration and faith, sometimes by sheer perseverance, sometimes by clarity of mind, and sometimes by the joy of inquiry. That's those 4 things: desire, energy, mind, and investigation. What unites them all is steady cultivation, supported by mindfulness and perseverance. The sutta explains that when these 4 bases are developed and cultivated, they lead to knowledge and vision, and ultimately to liberation. The message is clear. Awakening is not an accident. It arises from repeated, deliberate effort and channels the energies of the heart and mind. I often think of this teaching on effort when practice feels flat. Sometimes my energy has to be rekindled by remembering why I started practice in the first place. Desire in the sense of wholesome aspiration. And other times I draw on the simple discipline of showing up, even when I don't feel like it. Energy in its raw, steady form. At other times I return to investigation, curiosity about what's happening right now. Ajahn Chah once said, if you are lost in the forest, walk with determination in any direction. Better to keep walking than to sit down in despair. This captures the spirit of the Iddhipada Sutta. Whatever base of power feels available, use it and keep moving forward. Sayadaw U Tejaniya, one of my teachers, has written several books, one of which is When Awareness Becomes Natural. And he was dedicating a Dharma hall on Maui, where I lived for 35 years, and he gave this simple exercise about effort. How much effort is enough effort? We might want to know. So in this exercise, we just take a moment. So I'm going to ask you to do this with me. Just take a moment, bring up your hands in front of you, noticing your fingertips, and just take a moment. You might even close your eyes to do it because you'll be able to feel more. Bring your hands together and then let your fingertips touch. And now take your fingers away and bring them back and touch them. How much effort does it take for your fingertips to touch? Okay, you can let your fingertips go. It didn't take much effort, just like nothing. And so effort doesn't mean that we don't ever wobble. It just means that we keep showing up one step, one breath at a time, finding just enough effort for our practice to keep that lute string, as the Buddha referred to, the lute tightened just right to play the instrument. And so the last of these supports is awareness of impermanence. The Buddha taught that awareness of impermanence is the direct doorway to wisdom. In another one of his suttas, AN 7.46, he declares perception of impermanence, when developed and cultivated, is of great fruit, of great benefit. It leads to the deathless, to the exhaustion of craving. Impermanence is not just an abstract truth. It is visible everywhere. The body ages, moods shift, seasons turn, relationships change. Noticing impermanence softens our clinging and awakens compassion. We learn to hold the world gently. One of my teachers quipped one time, "Don't worry whatever problems you're having right now. It'll go away. And of course, so will you." That was kind of comic, tragic truth of impermanence. Everything goes. Which is sad, yes, but also liberating. Many years ago, while hiking, I stopped by a grove of aspens. The wind moved through the leaves, making them shimmer like silver. I was struck by how each leaf trembled for just a moment before yielding to the next. No grasping, no resistance, just dancing with impermanence. That image has stayed with me as a teaching. If leaves can let go so gracefully, perhaps I can too. So in this sutta, AN 7.46, it offers one of the Buddha's most direct statements on the liberating power of contemplating impermanence. It's called anicca nupassana. He declares that when a practitioner frequently and carefully observes impermanence, 7 profound benefits arise: disenchantment, dispassion, the ending of craving, knowledge and vision, and the complete ending of suffering. This is striking because it shows impermanence not as a minor reflection, but as the very engine of awakening. To see impermanence clearly is to loosen the chains of clinging. When we realize that all experiences, pleasant, painful, and neutral, are fleeting, our grip naturally softens. We no longer need to cling desperately to pleasant or fight endlessly against the unpleasant. In practice, this can begin in very simple ways. On retreat, I've watched the breath, noticing that no two inhalations are the same. Off the cushion, I've seen the same truth in a child's laughter. Beautiful, surprising, and gone in a moment. Each glimpse of impermanence is a taste of freedom. The sutta reminds us that impermanence is not an abstract truth. It's a doorway. Bhikkhu Analayo, another well-known German monk of our time, comments that mindfulness of impermanence leads to a natural turning away from suffering because we see the futility of clinging to what cannot last. What begins as observation deepens into wisdom, and wisdom flowers into release. To sit with this teaching is to realize that impermanence is not an obstacle to peace. It's the very condition that makes peace possible. If everything stayed the same, liberation would be impossible. Because things change, the heart can let go, and freedom can be known. Impermanence isn't only about letting go of suffering. It also means that joys too pass away, and this can be bittersweet. When we realize our loved ones won't be here forever, our appreciation deepens. Each hug, each laugh, each shared meal becomes precious. As Ajahn Chah said, and I've quoted this many times, if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. Awareness of impermanence trains us to let go little by little. So let's pause for just a brief reflection on these 5 supports. Just sit comfortably and close your eyes if you'd like to, and take a slow breath in and a slow breath out. Bring to mind one admirable friend who has inspired your practice. Let gratitude fill the heart. Reflect on a recent choice of integrity, large or small, and notice the lightness it brings. Recall a Dharma teaching that has stayed with you. Let it echo in your mind. Sense the effort you've made recently, showing up for meditation practice or for kindness. Acknowledge it with appreciation. Finally, turn your attention to impermanence. Feel the breath rising and falling, never the same twice. Everything changing, moment by moment. Rest in this awareness for a few breaths. In conclusion, I'll mention that these 5 things are not separate. They reinforce one another. Admirable friends encourage us to keep sila. Morality clears the mind to hear the Dharma. Hearing the Dharma motivates effort. Effort sustains mindfulness of impermanence. And awareness of impermanence deepens our appreciation of admirable friends. The circle keeps turning, each support feeding the others. The Buddha gave us this list not as dogma, but as practical guidance. Awakening is not a distant myth. It's the natural flowering of conditions. When the soil, sunlight, and rain are present, the seed sprouts. When admirable friends, virtue, dharma, effort, and impermanence are present, the heart awakens. So let's sit quietly for a few moments and let those words settle down. Thank you for listening to the Dharma, for being present. And I'm going to take a few minutes for us to have a little conversation about some questions and reflections. So I'm going to give you these, if you would distribute them. Thank you. And for those of you online, I put it in the chat. And so I'll just read the questions out loud, and then I'll stop the recording and we can have some conversation. The questions are there on the back side. And then we will conclude by chanting the chant on the back of the first piece of paper that was on your chair. So these questions and possibilities to share. Who are the admirable friends in your life, and how can you nurture those relationships? What does living with sila look like for you right now in practical daily choices? What does living with sila, oh, I did that. How do you hear the Dharma? Through talks, nature, silence? And how might you open up more to it? How do you experience impermanence, not only as loss, but as a source of beauty and freedom? So these are just little prompts for us reflecting on the 5 supports that lead to awakening, and how we can bring awakening in the midst of our modern lives. Friendship on the path, living with integrity, listening to the Dharma, cultivating effort, and seeing impermanence clearly. So I'm going to stop the recording.